It's my pleasure to welcome the organizer and facilitator of this year's plenary panel titled A Dialogue with Island Leaders on Climate Change. Over the past 2 decades, she has worked nonprofit conservation in the nonprofit and government sectors with particular focus on native ecosystem conservation and climate change adaptation. She is co-author of the 2012 Pacific Island Regional Climate Assessment Report and contributing author to the Hawaii and Pacific Islands chapter of the 2014 National Climate Assessment. Prior to her present role as the PIXI coordinator, she was the executive director of HCA, and she was up here many times organizing this conference. Let's have a hand for Deanna Spooner.
Thank you. I'd like to invite our esteemed panelists to come up and get settled in while I talk just a little bit about the logistics of this panel, and then we'll get into the very exciting aspects of the panel itself. So this is a really special group of people here who have agreed to spend the next hour in conversation with you about leadership on climate change. And it's not just leadership that's happening here in Hawaii, it's leadership globally. And this is a conversation that you all need to be a part of. And so this panel is designed just to do that. We're going to have a series of opening questions for the panelists. We're going to start local, go global. And then there will be some interaction amongst the panelists. And in the meantime, we're going to be asking you to be, if we could get the slide up, submitting questions. We're going to be gathering your questions via note card and text. We've got some wonderful volunteers who will be going through the audience with the note cards and collecting them from you, or you can text them in if you're more inclined to do that. And we're going to allow you to actually ask questions of the panelists, and then we'll wrap up at the end with a lightning round of a final question. So it is my great privilege to moderate such a distinguished panel, and I have to say it was very hard to come up with brief biographies for all of our panelists because they have such distinguished careers. Before I go into the biographies, I just want to very quickly set the context here. So why are we talking about climate change? Climate change is in the news pretty much every day now, and that is a new phenomenon. A year ago, that was not the case. 10 years ago, you would only find climate change mentioned in scientific journals. And now, literally, if you Google climate change, it comes up in the news every single day. And the debate is really shifting away from, climate skeptics to how do we address this as a global community, as a nation, and here in Hawaii. This past year in particular has seen quite a few milestones, some really bad and some quite encouraging. On the bad side, we saw for the first time the Mauna Loa Observatory that measures carbon dioxide concentrations hit 400 parts per million. And just to put that in context, it has been millions of years since we have had such concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So humankind has never before in our existence seen these levels. Another bad thing that happened quite recently is the nation of Kiribati had to buy 20 square kilometers of land in Fiji because they know that they are experiencing sea level rise at a very, very rapid rate, and the citizens of Kiribati need a place to relocate. The National Climate Assessment came out and confirmed once again that we're in trouble. There are many, many negative trends already happening throughout the nation. Drought, increased wildfire. Here in the islands, we see a decrease in freshwater and an increase in extreme inundation events due to sea level rise and storms. But there's some good things that have been happening this past year as well that are very encouraging. For example, a few months ago in Germany, the output of renewable energy was so high that for a brief period of time one day, the entire country was generating more energy than was being used. That's really encouraging. Another encouraging thing that happened, being led here in the Pacific, was the Majuro Declaration on Climate Leadership, which Hawaii signed on to as the first subnational government. And that really shows that Pacific Islanders are not waiting for the rest of the world to do something, that we are setting the tone for what the rest of the world needs to do around climate leadership. And another thing that I wanted to highlight, very positive, is that President Obama launched a climate change initiative, comprehensive initiative, the first time that a US president has actually done that. And he had the great foresight to develop a task force on state, local, and tribal leaders' climate preparedness and resilience. And he asked Governor Abercrombie and Governor Calvo from Guam to represent us islanders on that task force. And I just wanted to quickly say that the governor's representative, the state coordinator, Jackie Kozak-Teal, she's this week in Washington, D.C. at the task force meeting, and she met with President Obama yesterday and had a great conversation. And one thing that she said, she sent me a quick email, and she said that she wanted me to highlight the fact that Hawaii has formed a coalition with Guam and tribal leadership to elevate the issue of climate migration by recommending that the president convene an interagency task force on climate migration and establish a framework on how to help communities that are facing displacement. That would not have happened if Hawaii hadn't been there at the table. So we have lots to talk about, and I will try again to abbreviate the very distinguished biographies of our speakers. We're going to start with the Honorable Neil Abercrombie, Governor of the state of Hawaii, who is our 7th governor. He grew up in Williamsville, New York, and attended Union College. Came to Hawaii in September of 1959, and he began teaching assistant at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. While in graduate school, he worked an assortment of very colorful jobs. I was really impressed, including as a waiter at Chuck's Steakhouse in Waikiki.
I never should have left.
Free steak for life. Governor Abercrombie served in the State House of Representatives from 1975 to 1979 and the State Senate from 79 to 86. In 86, he won a special election to Congress, but then came home to serve as special assistant to the Superintendent of Education, and then later served on the Honolulu City Council from 88 to 90. And then in 1990, Governor Abercrombie was elected to return to Congress and represented Hawaii's 1st Congressional District in the House of Representatives until 2010. While in Congress, he served as chairman of the House Armed Forces Services Subcommittee on Air, Land, and Land Forces, and a senior member on the Natural Resources Committee. Please join me in welcoming Governor Neil Abercrombie.
Well, thank you, Dana. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, and aloha, everybody. Thank you very much. I take it that the panel can all be seen because I can't see about half the audience because of the podium. So is it everybody can see what we're doing? Okay, good, thank you. Please forgive me. I'm forced to look at Chipper mostly from here. So, yes, okay. I'm very, very pleased, of course, to be here. I'm particularly pleased to be with my good friend, the ambassador, who gave us the opportunity to join together as island people, particularly in the Pacific that's affected by climate migration, and gave us the opportunity to have our absolutely first-rate, wonderful, aside from being so knowledgeable and energetic, just one of the world's great human beings, Jackie Kozak-Teal, to be able to be the point person in Washington on climate migration, and I'm confident that among the recommendations that will be coming forward to the President with the task force on climate preparedness and resiliency will be a climate migration element. Precisely what form it will take, I think we can help shape today, hopefully, coming out of this conference. And of course, with Representative Lee, the word leadership is tossed around, particularly in political contexts, election contexts. But when you put a substantive definition behind leadership, I think you're going to find the name Chris Lee appearing again and again. And in time to come, I'm absolutely confident that his leadership will be recognized with increasing responsibility in this state. And Malia, very impressed with the important work that you're doing with regard to climate change. This is really an excellent panel. I feel very privileged to be a part of it. And I want to thank you for the mention of the President's task force. It is so important. And it fits with what I think is an increasing emphasis on subnational contacts. And I want to emphasize a little. Am I to start giving my little talk now, or stop?
Perfect.
Oh, okay. I want to be brief. I know there are questions to be addressed. The subnational context could not be more important right now. Do not think for a moment that you're going through the motions out here. And do not think for a moment you're going through the motions, especially with President Obama there. Forget about all the false drama being created by the media with regard to the President. We are the most fortunate people at this time in history to have Barack Obama as President of the United States, let me tell you, in no uncertain terms. No one, under no other president, think about it for a minute. You might have different views on some things having to do with the president. He's the president of the whole United States, after all. He's not an ideological spokesperson for abstract academic considerations. No other president would have even thought to have a task force on climate preparedness and resiliency, and then follow up with not just with recommendations coming, but is ready to implement the recommendations that come, and it's coming from the grassroots. That's what the IUC, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, is all about. For those who might not be totally familiar with it, just give me a few seconds to iterate something about it. Only nations apply for consideration for the Congress, and the United States did not. They didn't think they could do it. But because of, and Chipper's the first to tell you, there's a whole slew of people. It would take me 5 minutes to run through the list of people that had faith that we could do this. We brought it to the attention of the President. We brought it to the attention of the State Department. And as a result, Hawaii competed against the other nations, up to and including the final nation, which was Turkey. So I thought we did pretty good in that regard. But I want to emphasize, we did not denigrate anybody else. We didn't say we had merits and other people had demerits. We weren't trying to cite our virtues against other people's vices or anything of that nature. On the contrary, what we said, what Hawaii represented. And I just wanted to say that I'm particularly pleased that the theme of the conference is exactly the same as our navigating change. This is what we presented, Jackie and I, when we went to the first meeting of the task force in Washington, D.C. I regret to say that we were the only institutional entity there of all the tribes and councils and governors that had a plan. Now, this references the point that was made in the introduction, that as recently as a year ago, you couldn't get this conversation underway, except for those who are here today, right? And colleagues and friends across the country and across the world, say with the IUCN. And that's an internal conversation. It can amount to politically to what the amounts to inside baseball. It's like doing a lineup for baseball. Some people are very, very interested in the lineup. Very, very few people in the observing it are. But the change now has come. Navigating change. Hawaii has been a pioneer. Everybody here today, let me tell you, you can take a little bit of pride in the fact that that we're on it. And as a result, Hawaii's approach to adaptation, that's the whole point. It's adaptation. It's not exhortation. We're not here proselytizing. That's the second point I want to make is this is not an opportunity for to be an evangelist or a proselytizer. That's not what this is about. This is about the practical, hard-headed political realities of getting to adaptation in this rapidly changing world that is moving so fast that, believe me, we have to approach this from the point of view of what can we do as opposed to woe is me. That's the third point I want to make. No more lamentations about how bad it is and how difficult it is, because I guarantee you that, and Chris will verify this on the political side, I'm sure. You get into that routine, and what happens is people think we're screwed. There's nothing we can do, and they'll turn away. They're not going to thank you for the opportunity to be made to feel bad and that there's nothing they can do, and how come you're not on it already? Because there's an implicit kind of thing is I know and you should know and you don't, therefore there's something wrong with you. Now, that may not be your intention, but we got to take our egos out of this. We got to take our we know idea. You got to get rid of your personal relationship with God, right? You can't have that, because that means it's about you. It becomes an involuted and a we happy few atmosphere. We have to be very, very careful of that. So yes, we can take pride that we've got this, but that should be an incentive to us then to say, okay, now how do we reach out? How do we deal with this? Just with the Congress, the World Congress, that's the approach we took. The approach we took was, oh my gosh, how come it's just Hawaii? You know, we went to the State Department, went to the president, and said, this is our opportunity. This is terrific. Wow, we're ready to go. We can do this. Isn't this terrific? It got to the point, by taking that attitude, I don't know whether everybody's aware, President Obama wrote a personal letter to the committee, to the site selection committee, and just signed it Barack Obama. I mean, this came from him. Yes, President of the United States, but he was saying, I'm behind this. I want this to happen. That's the kind of attitude I think we need to bring. So the practical reality for that is with us. Let me just show you real quick. Real quick obviously isn't quite as quick as I want it to be, because that's because I'm looking at the picture of you and I, you see, toasting one another. I'm fascinated with it. Oh, shoot. I want to talk about the Resilient Hawaii Forums. I know I've got a picture here. For those of you who haven't, here we go. Here. This is what we're doing. This is what Jackie and our Office of Planning, Jesse Suki, and William Isla, and now Jesse's our deputy. Because Esther Kia'aina, right? I mean, this is being arrested. I'm switching from one to another. Esther Kia'aina was our deputy, and now she's the undersecretary of Interior for Insular Affairs. And Jesse Suki moved from planning to be deputy to William Isla. We're on this. We're on it every single day. This is the Resiliency Forum and our survey, our online survey that we're heading up. So we're on the practical side of this. That's the next thing. No exhortations. Here's the ABCD. Here's the game plan. Here's the timeline. Here's what we're going to do. We're already on it, for example, just very quickly, about what about the oceans rising? I don't want to read any more letters in the editor saying, let's move everything back a mile, right? I mean, please, that isn't going to happen. You've got beachfront property still for sale, okay? I'm not going to go down there like King Canute and say, no, you can't do it. That isn't going to happen. The Supreme Court just told me I've got to fix the seawall down at Diamond Head, right? There's thousands of people living there already. I just can't, it's not going to work to go down there and tell them, you know, you really ought to move inland. Okay. But what we're talking about with the resiliency forums is what about reefs? Nature already has a way of dealing with when the ocean comes up. Now, some of them are not going to work because the ocean is rising, right? But we're going to have to think about that. Maybe a 21st century version of the creation of reefs to help us to deal with that. I don't know if it's going to work, but we're on it. We're moving. We're trying to come up with answers, and that's what we need to do. So conservation is the other thing, and I'll finish with this. This is the rain follows the forest, the original agenda that we had 4 years ago, which thanks to Chris and some others, we're partially funding. The legislature still hasn't quite got the idea yet. Politics gets into it. You know, you have to elect people that understand that we shouldn't be fighting with one another, trying to score points on one another. We should be dealing with the issue, and then everybody will get credit for it politically. When the rain follows the forest, some people say, this is practical. This is practical. This isn't some idealized version of wouldn't it be nice to have native forests. There's a reason for it. It collects water. It saves water. We don't have the runoff into the ocean, which we need. And the native trees, when we have the rain following the forest, what that means is it retains more water than other invasive species that come in and take over and that cause the runoff to take place. And if you don't think this is practical, check what happened in California yesterday with my friend Jerry Brown. You do the wrong watering in California now, you're going to get a $500 to $1,000 a day fine. That's what's taking place. That's how desperate it is. And our invasive species, that is how desperate it is. You go on the mainland right now, I go to the national governors' conferences and the Democratic governors' conferences or the Western governors' conferences. Republican, Democrat doesn't make any difference. Let me tell you, energy and water are the two key elements that have to be addressed, and we're on it with that. So the importance of water and watershed management couldn't be more important. Conservation, that's another thing. Last thing I want to mention in this part of the presentation is there is emerging a differentiation between environmentalism and conservation. Conservationists and environmentalists are not necessarily speaking the same language, and I think that this needs to be addressed. I believe there's an element of ideological fervor that is coming into the discussion that takes place. And we have to be very, very careful, I think, that we don't form a version of a left-wing Tea Party. We have to be very, very careful in a political context of not forming a left-wing Tea Party that sets down absolutes. And unless you follow the party line from A to Z on any given issue, you're drummed out of the core, you're shoved to the margin, you're sent into Coventry. We can't afford to have that kind of exclusivity of ideas and approaches. We've got to be open to one another on this, and we've got to be careful that we don't create a bright line, dividing line between environmentalism and conservation. I won't go further with it today other than to alert us that we've got to be very, very careful about zealotry in the context of trying to figure out how do we actually get to the goal. So I mentioned invasive species, and let me just finish with and climate migration, but let me just give a practical example. I think we have an opportunity now, and there's some discussion taking place, and I mentioned it to Jackie yesterday, and it's, if you folks feel it's a good idea, I hope that you'll discuss it, and possibly one of the recommendations coming out would be this, and I'm just going to throw it out there. I'm a big reader and a big fan of the Civilian Conservation Corps idea. If you want to talk about conservation going from Teddy Roosevelt through Franklin Roosevelt to now, It's an interesting combination of ideas. The Civilian Conservation Corps did more for conservation, sometimes by default, not necessarily by design, than almost anything that took place since Teddy Roosevelt first got into the idea of setting aside land for conservation purposes. Again, regardless of what the motivation was for. Why not now? I'm thinking about a new conservation, a new triple C, the Climate Change Corps. Why can't we have a Climate Change Corps where we engage, just like, you know, the Teach for America now, the, what do I want to say, the Corps, the other...
AmeriCorps.
Not AmeriCorps, but it's the Peace Corps. Yeah, the Peace Corps idea and its children since then, right? What about a Climate Change Corps where including, you know, vets come back, kids who interns, where we attack invasive species, fix up trails, the whole conservation idea, and I'm willing to bet that people who say, yeah, conservation, I've got it, I got the climate change thing, I want to do something. I want to have a practical manifestation that I can involve myself in 3 dimensions. I want to use not just my mind, not just my mouth, but I want to use my hands. I want to use my brain. I want to accomplish something. So let's take up a modern hope, a next generation of leaders and communities through a Climate Change Corps, which would be the equivalent, a 21st century equivalent of the Civilian Conservation Corps. And I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Governor. I hope your remarks stimulate many questions from the audience. But next, we're going to be hearing from the Honorable Chris Lee, who is a representative, grew up in Kailua, Oahu, Hawaii State Representative. He attended Iolani School and later Oregon State University, where he graduated with a bachelor's degree in political science. Representative Lee also has a very colorful job history, and one of his jobs, earliest jobs, was working at the grill at Enchanted Lake McDonald. So I'm kind of seeing a theme here, you know, food service to politics.
No comparison to Chuck's.
No, we didn't get tips.
Representative Lee is currently the chair of the Committee on Energy and Environmental Protection. He also serves on the Consumer Protection and Commerce, Judiciary, Ocean, Marine Resources, and Hawaiian Affairs, and Water and Land Committees. And in 2013, Representative Lee co-authored the Hawaii Climate Adaptation Initiative Act, which was signed into law last month. And in the opening remarks of that law, it says, climate change is the paramount challenge of the century. And I'd really like to hear your thoughts about why did you author that legislation? Why now? And what's going to be the impact on Hawaii due to this legislation?
Well, I certainly didn't do it by myself. I should mention, going back, were the governor still a waiter today, I owe him a tremendous tip for the glowing comments he gave about me earlier. So thank you, sir.
Well deserved and earned.
But no, you know, this is a challenge that has been on the back burner for a long time, you know, decades. People have been talking about it in some circles, and this is definitely not the first time this has been addressed. I really want to give credit to earlier acts passed by the legislature with the help of the governor's administration in 2012 and earlier than that, which really set the stage and the groundwork for this, which acknowledged that climate change is a real issue and that we have goals that we want to achieve. We want to be able to adapt and mitigate to the extent we can. And that's something that's been really positive and I think has made us already a national leader in taking this on in a serious manner. But beyond that, what really started to change, I think, was in the last couple of years, I think for the first time, perhaps for the first state in the nation, I think, and don't quote me on this, but I think we're the first state in the nation that has had a governor's administration that has appointed a sustainability coordinator, Jackie, and put real money into these sorts of efforts that are going to take us through the long term, beyond just the next election. You're not going to get bonus points for that, but it's thinking ahead down the road that really...
It's not against the law to get bonus points for that, though.
It's not. It's not. I'm going to stay away from the elections jokes right now, but but really just taking a really serious stab at trying to address some of these issues and get the infrastructure in place to make this possible. 2 years ago, I actually tried a first draft of this bill, and we brought in some scientists and folks who've been working on these issues for a long time from the university and other places, and the attitude at that time was that, you know, it's too tough, there's not the political will to do it, and it's just not going to happen. And so that bill didn't make it, and that was a challenge, and so I tucked my tail between my legs and went home. But then, about a year ago, I was prepping my re-election, and I was going out to the community and meeting with folks, and I ended up sitting down at this group who a gentleman introduced me to, a round table of 5 or 6 kind of old-timer residents in Kailua. And they meet every morning, they have breakfast, and talk about politics and all the fun stuff. And so I walk up, and the first thing the guy says is, "So, you believe in that global warming?" And I'm thinking, okay, this is gonna go one of 2 ways. So I'm getting ready to cut my own throat here. And I'm listening to them talk about, and banter about how scientists are making money off of these grants, and they're just conjuring this up to try and perpetuate the myth and perpetuate their own funding, and so forth. I'm thinking, oh man, this is gonna be tough. Okay, so here we go. But right before I say something, the guy next to me chimes in and says, well, you know, maybe, I mean, there's a lot of problems with this, but what if some of it's true? And come to find out, the guy lives right on the beach in Kailua. And everybody knows that beach has been eroding for a lot of reasons, but being accelerated by the threat of climate change. And it was amazing to me. And I was taken aback because here's a guy who's standing up to peer pressure from his closest group of friends, saying, you know what, despite the fact that we all agree on everything else that we hear in the news, I'm not so sure about this because it could potentially affect my own home. And that was a complete sea change for me. Granted, he went to talk about how awesome BP is and how they're getting totally maligned by the media down in the Gulf. But that being said, it was impressive because what that meant to me was that here in Hawaii, despite all the rhetoric you hear out there and despite all the uncertainty that people have, the fact that some of them, the very people who are most against an issue like this or against even talking about an issue like this in a real manner are starting to acknowledge it because there's a tangible impact upon them that they're about to feel, that means attitude is changing. And that means maybe it's time. Maybe we have the political will. And so what we did this year, thanks with the help of Jackie and Jesse and the governor's administration and everyone else who stepped up to the plate, was put together a bill to start to take our goals and guidelines that we've set out in the past and say, all right, we're going to lay down now a roadmap to get there. And so it does 3 things. And really, this is a first step. This is by no means the answer, but by creating the Hawaii Climate Adaptation Initiative, what we're doing is we're assessing at a localized level the impacts that we're expecting to face in the coming decades. What's it going to mean to have sea level rise, not just generally in Hawaii, but for different communities? What's it going to mean for Waikiki, where you have a built environment, but yet a beach that means tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to our economy that probably is going to go away if we lose the beach? What's it going to mean to communities like Kailua, North Shore, and other places that have their entire center of their very existence built around this environment that we cannot afford to lose, because it means a lot to our culture, to our economy, to everybody who lives in the area. So what is that going to mean to those specific local communities? And then for each community, what are we going to do about it? What does the planning look like? What are the recommendations and policy going to be that are going to allow us not to just run away like the governor said, but rather adapt based on the infrastructure and what the people want in those areas over the coming decades? And then thirdly, and this is probably the most important thing that this lays out, is what are we going to do to implement? And so what this does is centralize coordination between the counties, the state, all the different agencies and departments in one house, under one roof, so that everybody knows what everyone else is doing and things aren't falling through the cracks. And if one department comes up with a great answer to some particular thing, they're going to share that with everybody else, and everyone's going to be able to immediately amend their planning for best results. And so that, thanks to the governor who signed that into law down at the Waikiki Aquarium just about a month ago, right? Yeah, makes us a national leader in this respect, and it is really thanks to all the folks who've stepped up in the face of a lot of criticism and a lot of national uncertainty at higher levels, that this may not be the right thing to do. But we know here in Hawaii and here in island nations that we are going to, whether that debate rages on for decades or not, feel those effects today, and they're only going to get worse. So we need to start to take action. I think we really can begin to get a grasp on things and figure out that this isn't just some culture-ending, life-changing, end-of-the-world scenario, but rather this is one challenge among many that we can deal with and we can overcome, because our very existence here in these islands depends on it. And I'm totally optimistic now, seeing not just here in Hawaii, but on a national scale with President Obama and others, that the national and international global opinion on this is starting to change, and we're starting to get resources, real resources, put into this. So with that, I'll pause and pass it on, and be happy to answer questions later.
Thank you, Representative Lee. And that's the perfect segue to our next presenter, who bridges the local and international dialogues. I'm so grateful that Malia Nobrega Oliveira agreed to be on the panel today, because this week she is helping to organize the World Conference of Hula on the island of Kauai, and she flew over specifically for this panel. Thank you so much. And again, so many honors. It's hard to reduce them, but Malia she wears here 2 hats. She's the Director of Strategic Partnerships for Lole Aneo, Makaala Aneo, which is Climate Change, Climate Alert. The acronym for that is LAMA. And LAMA is a new program that's housed within the Hawaii Nui Akea School of Hawaiian Knowledge, developed in partnership with the William S. Richardson School of Law at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And Malia also holds the title of Director of Strategic Partnerships and Community Engagement at Hawaii Nui Akea. So she's got 2 extensive kuleana jobs there. She is a Native Hawaiian educator, community organizer, and advocate of indigenous rights at all levels, locally, regionally, and internationally. She received a bachelor's degree in Hawaiian language and a master's degree in educational technology from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And her advocacy work has taken her to the United Nations many times, such as at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, United Nations World Summit on Information Society, United Nations Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the Convention on Climate Change. She's currently the international coordinator for the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Biodiversity, as well as the coordinator of Indigenous Peoples of the Pacific who participate in the United Nations meetings on both biological diversity and climate change. And last year, Malia participated in the first International Women's Earth and Climate Summit, where she co-chaired the Summit Working Group on Rights of Nature, Indigenous Peoples, and Earth Community Economy. Please help me in joining a welcome for Malia Nobrega Oliveira.
Aloha aina kupuna, aina ho'ola, aina ulu, aina ho'olu, ho'olu lahui, lahui Hawaii, eola, eola, aloha aina. Aloha aina e. Aloha. Aloha kako, o wau no o Malia, no Nobrega Oliveira, he kama au no ka mokupuni o Kauai, o hana pepe ku'uone hanau. Mahalo nui I keia kono ana ia'u e noho pu me oko. My one hanau is hana pepe. In the moku of Kona, on the mokupuni of Kauai. In the work that I do, I always have been reminded whether it be from my kupuna or it be from any of my kumu, that pilina to the aina, that pilina to our loina Hawaii, and pilina being relationship, the pilina to the kanaka, the pilina to the lahui remains intact. The work that goes outside, the work that goes on outside of Hawaii, if and when I travel, has to always be based on the work of the people here. I wouldn't travel if I didn't have that pilina to the aina. Or I wouldn't be a voice, an active voice, if that pilina was not intact at all times. Our ohana are culture practitioners, people of the aina, people of pu'olo. Pu'olo being more commonly known as salt pond. We are salt practitioners. We are one of about 30 ohana that continue this tradition that doesn't exist anywhere else in Hawaii today. When I share my mo'olelo outside of Hawaii and even in Hawaii at the hula conference yesterday, and people wonder why I get involved with climate change and why that becomes a part of the work I do today at the university or in the community. And I tell them my mo'olelo begins with that which comes from generations before me to continue this tradition of salt making. And when I look at it just in my lifetime alone, 43 years, climate change is having an impact on this particular cultural practice of salt making. In my lifetime alone, yes, we've had very productive summers where we would harvest 75-gallon buckets of pa'akai in one harvest. But yet in my lifetime, I've had 2 summers where our ohana has not been able to even enter in to pu'olo to continue this practice because of the flooding that happens in the area. With sea level rise, the whole place gets flooded with increased rain that happens. It's having a direct impact on our cultural practices, this being just one of them. I don't know what my life is like without being a salt practitioner. What happens when that is not, or when I'm not able to continue that with my keiki? So when doing the work, we always look at that ike that is passed on from our kupuna and how that ike, that traditional knowledge, that ancestral knowledge, how that gets passed on from one generation to the next. And the kuleana that each of us take to ho'omau, a ho'oulu, ke la ike kupuna, to continue to let it grow, to continue to let it flourish. And from a policy side, to recognize that the traditional knowledge of the native people, the Kanaka Maoli here on this aina, or whether it be indigenous peoples in every part of this world, that ike holds the solutions. We're always looking for solutions. We're always looking for what is next. How are we going to do this? our kupuna have adapted year after year. It's a part of our culture. We learn to adapt. There's solutions there. And I know that there have been some positive movement in that part. And at every level, even at an international and at a national level, Indigenous peoples continue to advocate for that recognition of who we are as one Indigenous peoples. Peoples of the Aina. People who have continued to malama and to aloha Aina. Without that recognition, pa'akiki ka holo ana imua. It'll be difficult. That part of that recognition is that we are there at the table. We sit at the table, being our own voice. When we talk about participatory mechanisms, how do we get the Kanaka to sit at the table? And what does that look like? That mechanism needs to be full, effective, direct, meaning we make the decisions, we come to the table, we have a voice. Not go through one organization and then, oh, that's what the Hawaiians said. The process takes a long time. It takes a while. But that kind of equal participation, especially here in Hawaii, where we have a trust to the general public and Native Hawaiians. To me, that has always been a part of that kahua that goes forward at any of the meetings at a local level, at a national level, at a regional level when we participate with the Pacific region, and then at an international level. My eyes became more maka'ala to also looking at it from a wahine perspective. And growing up in Hanapepe and being around hula practitioners, we always surrounded with awesome mana wahine. I think many of you will agree that there's so many wahine leaders in our community today. It's pretty amazing. But not in every country, not in every part of the world. When I sit with my sisters from Nairobi, Kenya, or my sisters from Peru, and I listen to their mo'olelo, I can't help but just be so thankful and mahalo that as a part of who we are as Kanaka, our wahine always took forth that kind of action. But also, it made me look more into the ike, the knowledge that women have, specialized knowledge. When I did my talk yesterday about salt making and the uses of it and why it's so important, I shared a little bit about how wahine have responsibilities and kuleana every step of the way throughout salt making. And that's like many of our other cultural practices. So when it comes to even looking at climate change action plans, it's looking at how do we involve the women in this? Because women do have that specialized ancestral knowledge of nearshore fisheries and of other things that happen within our islands and in our culture. So I think, just to wrap up in this beginning part, I wanted to also reiterate that kind of advocacy work around our recognition of our knowledge, our traditional knowledge, our collective rights as a people, and making sure that our participatory mechanisms are full, effective, direct, and equal. A oia no ko'u makana I kia manawa, a mahalo nui kia a koko ana. Aloha.
Mahalo. And last but not least, we have the Honorable Ronald Jameau, who is the roving ambassador for climate change and small island developing state issues for the Seychelles. I could say so much about Ambassador Ronnie, but I would rather he talk about himself. So all I'm going to say right now is thank you for coming and representing three incredibly important institutions. The first is the Seychelles. The second is the Alliance of Small Island States, or AOSIS. And the third is the Global Island Partnership, or GLISPA. Your leadership is truly inspirational.
Thank you, Deanna. Thank you. Aloha, everybody. Thank you, Deanna. As usual, you set the bar high for me. And you have a personal way of saying things that makes me want to have to deliver for you personally as well as for everybody in this room. And wow, Malia, you're such an inspiration. I may not come from these islands. I may not come from your culture. But I feel you. I feel you from the Indian Ocean where I come from. Representative Lee, you're an example of these energetic new leaders that we need to carry the torch forward. When you're speaking for Hawaii, you speak for me, you speak for my islanders as well. And speaking as chair of GLISPA and the spokesman for AOSIS, which is the gathering of 38 independent island nations around the world, you speak for all of us. Remember that. All three of you, you don't speak just for Hawaii, you speak for all of us. As for the governor, boy, oh boy, you are on a roll. First of all, through you, I'd like to congratulate Hawaii on the launching of the Aloha Plus challenge. And secondly, for bringing the World Conservation Congress to Hawaii. And as a fellow islander, I celebrate with you. I'd like to go back to something you said, Governor, a quote. It's what, and I quote, "What can we do as opposed to woe is me?" Those of you who have heard me speak during this trip and when I came last year know how I feel about the kinship, the brotherhood, the sisterhood of islanders around the world, irrespective of your political status. From what you said, it seems there's a telepathy amongst us, because that is exactly what AOSIS has been doing in the climate negotiations since last year. Since last year, we have decided to refuse to act as victims. There's nothing people hate more than a whiner. And that's nothing to do with islands, that's human nature. And it doesn't matter how just your cause is. If you just complain, you will find that people see you coming and say, "Oh dear, here he comes again, let's cross the road." Because they're tired of it. You sap the strength out of them. I mean, up to how much can you sympathize with someone before, when the next whine, you start saying to yourself, "Why won't you shut up and do something about it?" And this is what we're doing in the climate change negotiations. Since last year, AOSIS, the small island states, have decided that we are going to lead by example and shame everybody else, bar none. We do start off with a little wine by saying, despite the fact that we are the ones who have least contributed to climate change, despite the fact that we are the ones who are going to suffer most from a problem we did not cause, I'm going to show you how to tackle it. And this is what Hawaii is doing through Aloha Plus. It's saying to the rest of the world, I'm going to stand up and be counted. We have immense challenges, as do all islands around the world, and this is what we're going to do about it. So I challenge all of you in the room today, get on that bandwagon. The Hokulea has sailed. Now is not the time to turn up at the quayside and say, where's the Hokulea? It's halfway across the Pacific. Where were you? And this is what Aloha is, the Aloha Plus Challenge. It's the same voyage. And when I came last year and I called on the Hawaiians and I called on the governor and I said it's time for Hawaii to step up and step forward, oh boy, in 1 year you have done it in style. And I applaud you for it. As a spokesman of AOSIS, I applaud you all for what you're doing in your islands, which is an inspiration to islands around the world. Now, I'm going to stop here for my introductory remarks because, as Deanna knows, once I get going, it's difficult to stop me. So let me stop myself and exercise some self-discipline for once. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Ronnie. This has been such a fascinating discussion, and I have failed at my job as moderator because we are out of time. So this is my pledge to you. I'm going to take all your questions, and I'm going to hound our panelists, and we're going to get answers posted on the HCA website, conference website, answering all the questions that you have put to us. And in the last minute, or minute and a half, 30-second lightning round, this is it. Sum up in 30 seconds your thoughts about the next bold leadership step Hawaii should take to ensure a climate-resilient future. Ronnie, go.
I have another challenge for you, Governor Abercrombie. We have launched in the climate negotiations what we call Work Stream 2. The negotiations on the climate agreement for Paris is Work Stream 1. Work Stream 2, we're bringing in all the people who cannot be part of the negotiations, which is between sovereign states. We're bringing in civil society, academia, everybody. And we're saying, everybody put on the table the things you are doing already to address climate change so that we can together see how we can replicate, upscale it, spread it around the world. So I'm going to ask the governor, talk to Todd Stern's people. And remember the term, Work Stream 2. Say you want the Aloha Plus Challenge to be in Work Stream 2. Because if it gets in, because the Americans, the US, when we talked about Work Stream 2, they said, oh, good, it's going to allow us to bring in our governors and mayors. So you step up there and say, I have Aloha Plus Challenge. And through Work Stream 2, with the support of our island nations, we're going to take Aloha Plus Challenge global as part of the global solution, not the Hawaiian solution, not just the island solution. We're going to take it as part of the global solution of showing islands stepping up, stepping forward, and showing the rest of the world this is how you do it. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, Malia, 30-second lightning round.
Mahalo again for this opportunity. And I think for me, any new bold policies and actions need to come from a place based in culture. And that cultural narrative needs to reach out and say things like restore, respect, replenish. and to replace that narrative of dominate, deplete, and destroy. And again, I have to reiterate that intimate pilina, that emotional pilina, that spiritual pilina that we need to have as Kanaka to the Aina. Without the people being on their Aina and being able to thrive together with their ohana, which includes our biodiversity, our resources, our culture cannot live on without that pilina. So that pilina to the Aina, the pilina to our biodiversity, all of our meaola, needs to happen with all of those components together. Eola.
Okay, Representative Lee.
Thank you. I really think that the next steps and the bigger challenge is not for us here at this table or in government or anywhere, but rather for all of us together. And what that's going to look like is getting everybody engaged, aware, and talking about the issue in a context that makes it tangible to them. We don't want to end up like other states, like, is anybody from North Carolina? I'm about to offend someone here. But like North Carolina, where because you didn't have a broad understanding in the public, when government took action, they set out a plan, said we're going to look 100 years out, and they found, oh no, we're going to have hundreds of square miles of land inundated by rising seas. And so when the people said, well, that's not really important to us because we don't have an understanding of the issue, we'd rather have our potholes filled today and our taxes lowered and everything else, the government then said, okay, well, that sounds bad, so maybe we'll just look out 30 years, and it's a lot smaller problem now, so we can deal with it. And we can't have that kind of mentality. And what that's going to take is everybody getting involved. I mean, 10 years ago, don't spread this around, 10 years ago, I didn't even vote. I would have voted for the governor if I did at the time. But to think that in that time, I got involved in an issue, eventually ran for office, and did all kinds of crazy stuff, but are now making what I feel is a little bit of a difference. That is incredible, because if I can do that, just a kid off the street who grew up here, if I can do that, then all of you surely can at the very least get out there and bring this issue to the forefront so that others, if not yourself, can get involved and can take action. And that's what it's going to take to compel further action on behalf of our government, on behalf of the rest of the world, to make this happen and to save the culture that we hold dear. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And Governor, 30-second lightning round.
Sure. There's an iron rule in politics. You cannot institutionalize a mood. I'll say that if I did that for 30 seconds. You cannot institutionalize a mood. It doesn't matter what kind of an atmosphere you set, including in here, if you're not prepared to institutionalize it, if you can't take it past yourself into the practical, quotidian, everyday reality of making things happen and having a game plan and a timeline. The declaration with respect to the ambassador's challenge, the declaration of commitment in the Aloha Plus challenge, which we intend to take forward with the task force, involves 6 things: clean energy, local food, natural resource management, waste reduction, smart sustainable communities, and green workforce and education. Okay, those are the 6 things. I won't elaborate further. But in order to do that, that's great. That's a mood. Who's against any of that stuff? Nobody's going to raise their hand, okay? Then you have to have the infrastructure, the green infrastructure. You have to make investments. When I keep talking about that, about making investments, you got to have preschool. You got to have little kids with 80% of their brains developed by the time they're 4-year-olds, already having the development opportunities made available to them. You got to get them into the 21st century. Every child in the state has to have a tablet, has to be computer literate. And it has to be before they get into kindergarten, or they're already behind. You know, I don't want to argue about this stuff anymore. I don't. You know, you've got to take stands on these things and move if they're going to do it. These are the practical, everyday realities. Otherwise, you're not going to be talking about green workforce jobs and all the rest of it if the kids are already behind everybody else that's doing it. You have to have partnerships about the indigenous people. You have to have real partnerships. That means you're going to have to deal with corporations. Instead of just standing there and saying, these international thieves and all the rest of that kind of stuff. That's complete egotistic waste of time. It's self-indulgence of the worst possible institutional nature. Make deals like Turtle Bay. I'm glad we made a deal with the resort people out there, because now we have access to the coastline. Before we had 100% of nothing. Now what we've got is agriculture, conservation, environmentalism, preservation, and jobs for people, and workforce the development that's going to have a practical, realistic, long-term effect. Those are the kinds of things that have to be done. So the bottom line is, establish these partnerships, and promote coordinated and integrated action with the community and the other institutions that are there. Increase long-term financing. Take advantage of these. Why do you think I'm pushing so hard on the infrastructure? Like rebuilding the highway rather than repaving it. To hell with the potholes. Rebuild the highway now. That creates the jobs. That creates a solid foundation for the future, and the interest rates are never going to be lower. It ticks up 0.25%, and let me tell you, that's tens of millions of dollars you're on the hook for, and that the kids are on the hook for. So get the long-term financing and get that kind of infrastructure. And then finally, report. Get out there. Let people know about it. If you come out of here, call up the Rotary Club. Call up the Exchange Club. Call up the different community associations and ask to speak. Give them the opportunity to let you know who you are. Believe me, they're always looking for speakers. So it's a practical, everyday reality to it. And what's more, last thing of my extended 30 seconds is no, what you're going to find is, like Chris did, somebody who says, you know, I've been thinking that, but, you know, I thought I was the only one. I didn't know there was anybody else that thought like that. Or you've opened something up to me that I kind of was interested in but didn't know who the hell to talk to or where to go about it. You're going to find allies. You're going to find that you can institutionalize that mood, and we're all going to be better for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Let's have a standing ovation for one of the greatest panels, and for Deanna.